Hey everyone, what is going on? I'm Matthew Oliver, and this is Stillwater Alchemy, the podcast, episode 2, Origin Story. On this episode, I will let you peek behind the curtain into my life and reveal more intimate details about myself and how this whole shebang got started in the first place. So let's dive in, shall we? All right. So I'm not sure if it's because I have multiple planets in Scorpio in my natal chart, but the whole topic of like revealing things about myself, it's not that I'm opposed to it, obviously, hence why we're here today. But I feel like there's so much that I could talk about. And so to distill it into a story that would be cohesive and make sense and not be here for many, many hours is the intention and the goal for today. And I think it's interesting as well because I see a lot of hate for Scorpios, and I have my entire life about how Scorpios always pry and pry and pry and want you to reveal lots about yourself before they reveal anything about them. And while that can be true, I think it's more so, and I'm just speaking for myself as a Scorpio stellium, that we need to ensure that you are able to go deep, that you have processed these emotions, that you have faced certain pains and trauma in your life for us to feel safe, that you can hold our emotion. Because this is something I've heard my entire life is that you're so intense, you're so savage, you're so this, you're so that, you're too much of this, you're too much of whatever it was. And it gets to a point where you really have to have such a strong mindset to not let that get to you because it can feel like your emotion, your energy is something that people can't handle. So then you, as a defense mechanism, hold back to ensure that you're not going to repel people or that you're not even going to be able to make that initial connection. So that is why, if you are listening, at least from my personal experience in working with other Scorpios and having many Scorpio friends and lovers and all the things, is that they will often ensure that you have the depth and the capacity to go deep, 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 deep so that they feel safe to do so. I think when you're on the other side in terms of being a leader or being someone that's holding space for someone, it helps to know why they're even in that position to begin with so that you can have that bridge to connect and to invest further. And I've shared different parts of myself on my website or in content or on lives or things of that nature, but having a episode on this podcast for longevity and things that I can expand upon in the future, I thought would be a good idea. So I grew up in Saskatchewan, in the prairies of Canada, and I hated it. I did not like it whatsoever. I'm such a city person, I always have been. And lest we forget that there were so many laws against being queer, not having equal rights, not being able to marry. And that really only started shifting like 2012 in North America, in America specifically. Yes, Canada is more liberal, but growing up in the prairies, Saskatchewan's probably one of the most conservative provinces in Canada. So it was not easy for me being closeted, having these spiritual, intuitive gifts, being super into astrology, and not really having a sounding board. And also growing up in a really homophobic, not really, but I had teachers in my high school that were openly homophobic and would say things in front of me, not me being out at the time, that was really shocking and alarming. So I think, and this is something I've heard with people that identify as witches or people that have strong spiritual or psychic gifts, that they've used these gifts and these blessings to help people. And then people get scared and people demonize them and attack them. And we know the history of witches. We know the history of queer people where a lot of times we have not felt safe. We have had our rights taken from us. We have had certain obstacles that would decimate the average individual. And so to have that resilience and that tenacity to keep going, to keep being of service, to keep sharing your light is a victory in and of itself. And for me, as I was growing up, my intuition was so powerful. It was so strong. There'd be people that I just wouldn't like or people that I wouldn't trust. I could even tell when my parents were lying from a very, very young age both my older brothers played hockey, and at certain hockey rinks, there would be these arcade video games. I still love playing video games to this day. I feel like it was like such a safe space for me growing up to like decompress and focus on these stories and this fantasy. But my parents would lie. They're like, no, like the arena that we're going to doesn't have video games. Like, don't bring your change purse. Like, don't bring coins. And I was like, they're lying. They're lying. And then they did lie. And then I just had these crazy trust issues with authorities because I'm like, why would you lie about the most mundane things? You can just be like, oh, if you watch the first period, then you can go play video games during halftime, whatever. You know what I mean? So that's also an element of Scorpio energy for all you listening, because I'm a Scorpio sun and Mars and Pluto. And I also have Pallas Athene in Scorpio and my MC. So there's a lot of Scorpio goodness. And again, I feel like Scorpio and Gemini, for that matter, given that we're currently in Gemini season as I'm recording this, get a lot of hate and misunderstanding. And we've seen when certain groups of people get hate because they're misunderstood, how that works out for the collective. And it's never very good. But at least, like I said, I'll speak on behalf of Scorpios in my personal experience. Like when you can tell someone's lying to you and then you find out that they're lying, how do you think that makes us feel when we are on the receiving end of that? And it's interesting with clients because I'll feel like a contraction in my throat or in my chest or in my head when they're not fully revealing the truth or when they don't want to go deep, which is fine. It's their time. They paid for it, but I've developed this from such a young age. And I think when I'm working with certain clients, they'll say like, oh, like, what's your intuition saying? Or what are you doing? And I'll even hear from spirit, from source, from God being like, no, don't tell the human, because they're not learning how to develop their own intuition. There are certain times where, yes, I'm doing tarot readings, or when I'm doing certain things and the channel is open, I'm just saying what I perceive to be very random, but I know and I've developed this gift that it means something very specific for the individual. But when people ask me, it's like, turn on, operate. It's like, no, this is still my body. It's my vessel. It's my unique channel. That would be like telling someone, it's like, perform a monologue right in front of me when you're at dinner just because they're an actor. That wouldn't make sense to just expect someone to perform for your amusement. And that was something that I faced early on when I started Stillwater Alchemy, which was, you can still see that very first post on Stillwater Alchemy's Instagram. It was on June 15th, 2019. So Stillwater, back then it was Stillwater Tarot, but is a Gemini sun. Fun fact. And so it feels very fitting to be doing this podcast and starting it during Gemini season 5 years later. But to get back to at the very beginning, I made it very clear in my mind that I would never do this just to appease people or them be, oh, dance, monkey, dance. Like, let's make you pull some cards or look at my chart. Like, I don't want to be in connection with people that don't value this work, that don't honor this magic, that don't revere the time, energy, and discipline it takes. And this is something I would encourage for anyone, no matter what your skill set, no matter what your talents are. And maybe there's part of you that maybe has some dominant Martian or Mars placements where you just want to beat and to shove it in people's faces, being like, see, look, I told you I was right. That's one field of thought or thinking. But I always want to be in a state where people are excited to be in connection with this art form, with this craft, with this study, because it is so beautiful and is remarkable. It truly is magic. And that's the way saying I'll talk about this in terms of people being obsessed with like Harry Potter or Lord of the Rings or any fantastical piece of media, instead of realizing that they can have this ability in their own life. In episode 1, just the tip, I talked about intentions and what intentions I had for the podcast, but I'll set intentions every single day. I will set intentions when I'm with someone, and then after the event happens, whether it's a gig or a date or a shopping excursion, and they'll be like, literally exactly what you said came true word for word. I'm like, yes, exactly, because this is how it works. So I knew from a very young age when I would say certain things and they happened, or when I felt certain things and the truth was revealed, I'm like, oh, this power is available to me all the time. But growing up in that very conservative, quote unquote, traditional province, and then in a family that only revered academia, like creative pursuits weren't really the vibe, because both my parents come from immigrant families. And so it was always like, go to school, become a doctor or a lawyer, get the quote unquote security and the benefits, then you can be a breadwinner as a man, live happily ever after. And so I did that. I was so programmed to make my parents happy and to study really hard and to get the best grades. And I did do that. I graduated top of my class, got all the scholarships, went to university, 4.0, studied abroad, got a paper published. Like I did that whole journey and I do not regret that whatsoever. I'm very grateful that I got the opportunity to study with Olympians and sport medicine doctors and people that are really, really passionate about higher knowledge because it's something that I truly value myself. My natal Jupiter is in Virgo in the ninth whole sign house. So I love learning. I love really, really smart people. It just turns me on so much. But when I finished my master's and even like halfway through it, I'm like, I don't want to go into dentistry. When I had moved to Vancouver to do my master's, I was saying the story of why I want to be a dentist, and every time I said it, it just felt less and less authentic. And I was like, it just felt gross. And I was like, actually, all I want to do is be an actor. Like, that's all I've ever wanted to do since I was young. And that plays into the theory that your soul already knows what it wants to be. Oftentimes, right when you're born, like those passions, those skill sets, those desires you have as a child, is your soul being reincarnated and having this firm kind of like loose memory and desire to move into certain fields. So I always was super, super into acting and performing. And I also love Sailor Moon. I like literally in elementary school, which should have been such a obvious, blaring green flag that I was a homosexual, someone who was queer. But I would have like a Sailor Moon notepad. Like when the teachers were handing back the notebooks from doing the homework, whatever, mine was like pink and Sailor Moon. Like I still to this day, like if you put on Sailor Moon, I'm like, yes, the energy, the Sailor Scouts, these planets, the elements, like I was so in it. And I think any queer astrologer probably was into Sailor Moon at some point, especially if you're a millennial. But that was like, for me, it was like Sailor Jupiter, yes, Mercury, the intellect. I'm like, yes, yes, yes. I mean, they're all fabulous and amazing, but I mean, I could just have a whole podcast on Sailor Moon. Maybe I'll add it to the list. My point is, when I was younger, acting and Sailor Moon, thus astrology, were really two big passions that I love. Like I still remember not getting the lead for a school play when I was in like grade 3 because the lead's mom was like on the school board and it was like nepotism at its finest. I'm like, this is not fair. But as that conditioning grew up and then going into academia, I saw just firsthand how powerful our environment, our family, the societal conditionings can have on us, and that if we don't follow quote unquote a certain rubric quote unquote that you're not going to be successful, which is just simply not true. I've done so many things that my entire family very rudely have told me that I would be stupid to pursue, that no one would ever do that, that this is a waste of time or this and that. And I'm happy to have broken free from that conditioning because then when I hold space for other people or other clients and I can have empathy and compassion, number one, but number two, be an example that you can do whatever you want. That if it may not happen on a certain timeline, but if it's meant for you, that it is going to happen. It's already happening, even if you like it's not happening. Those redirects from the universe to learn certain things or to meet people or to answer someone else's prayer are always happening every single time. So after I finished my master's and I was pursuing acting, I had a choice whether I wanted to stay in Vancouver or move to Toronto. This was circa 2016. And so at the time, I had had a deck of tarot cards with me that was gifted from a fellow Scorpio who was my RMT at the time when I was studying in Saskatchewan at the U of S. And when I did my year abroad in Australia, I had had these cards with me and I was working. It was wild. I don't even know if it was legal, to be honest, but I was on a student visa, which allowed me to work 20 hours a week. But I was working, I want to say like 35, 40 hours a week at this coffee shop. It was kind of insane. So this was in Brisbane, Australia. It was a car wash for like luxury cars, but then you could wait in this cafe and they would have like sandwiches and sushis. And Australians take their coffee very, very, very seriously, like rivaling Italy seriously, which I love because I'm a Capricorn rising. I love coffee. Aries moon, I have to temper how much caffeine I take in, but I really learned how to further appreciate coffee while I was in Australia. And during that time, I was taking 5 university classes plus working 35 hours to 40 hours. So I'd like wake up at 4:30, open up the coffee shop, take the city cat. It was like this boat that you could take down the river in Brisbane to the campus, go to class, go back to the coffee shop, close it, then take the city cat back to the library and like meet my friends, It was a lot. A lot of this was spurred with my parents telling me that I couldn't do it and that I wouldn't be able to go abroad and that I would need their support and that I would not be able to succeed. So that was a little bit of ego, but it was also for me being like, if I can do this at age 20, live around the world, not having anyone to support me and thrive and succeed, then I've won. This is actually a really good story that ties in the origins of tarot and how I knew that all this was going to work out for me in every point in my life. I was given that tarot deck by the fellow Scorpio before I left for that trip to Brisbane. And me working that many hours, it only lasted about a month because it was just way too much. Like working 35 hours plus being a student and doing all this stuff. And it kind of came to my mind. I'm like, why am I just working nonstop to prove a point? I want to be able to enjoy this time in Australia. And I pulled a couple of cards because my boss was actually deranged. He would call me employee of the month one day saying that everyone loved my coffee and would like recommend me to him as like being the best employee. And the next day say that I was stealing from the till because it was like 30 cents short, even though my coworker screamed bad juju and that's whatever it was. It was just confusing and I didn't want to keep working there when I was under so much stress and I was so fatigued. Yes, I was 20. I was able to like handle it for a bit, but it was just way too much. And I remember playing cards and it was like these were Archangel cards, not traditional Rider-Waite cards, but it said like career transition, change, and everything is going to be okay. Those were the three cards I got. And the next day I decided I was going to quit. And a regular, I still remember her name, Lynn Jackson. She came in with her Dalmatian sitting in the passenger seat in like this beautiful red convertible. And I had nothing to lose. And I asked her, I'm like, hey, Lynn, like, this is my last day. I'm quitting. Do you know of anyone else in the city that is hiring in hospitality? Whatever it is, I'll commute. It doesn't matter. I'm just really looking for a job. She's like, yeah, babe, no problem. There's this place called Crew Bar in Fortitude Valley. It's very luxe. It's very international. I'll put in a good word with the manager. Literally the next day, the manager contacted me. His name is Neil, or he was managing at the time. This was again 2012, so many moons ago. But he called me. He's like, "Yep, come in for an interview." I interviewed a week after, and then the following week is when I started my first shift. So the entire time I was living in Brisbane, I was only without work for like 2 weeks. And it just went to show me like how real these cards were. It just gave me that confirmation and this push and that everything was going to be okay. And it just gave me the confidence even to approach Lynn. I'm like, okay, career transition, change, like everything is going to be okay. Like I am supported. This is going to work. And so afterwards, now we're fast forwarding to when I was done my master's in Vancouver, I had a choice of whether I want to stay in Vancouver or move to Toronto. And in Toronto, I had a lot of friends who I had made when I was in Brisbane. So I was flying back and forth between Vancouver and Toronto to visit them, to hang out, to party, to do all the things. And then I decided, I'm like, no, like I really do love big cities. And Vancouver is beautiful. Even back then when I was doing my master's, it's just very small. And I like big things. I like big cities. And so I moved to Toronto, started taking acting classes, hunting for an agent. But even when I was with my friends, they're always like, oh, can you pull a few cards? Can you pull a few cards? Like, you're so good. You're so this, you're so that. And I would just like pull cards and people's eyes would be wide open, mouth the gape. I'm like, yeah, I think you're seeing someone who's already in a relationship. I think they're a Sag. This is happening. This is what's going on. And I had no idea because they were like friends of friends and they knew the inner gossip and the hot tea, but I had no idea. Like, I was just that kind of like token gay friend at the parties. And it was interesting just getting all this positive feedback because it just came so naturally to me as if you were gifted in singing or mathematics, where it was just so natural for this gift to flow in, another avenue for you to use my gifts in this way. And with the astrology, it's just been something that I honestly feel like I've been studying astrology and coding of energy in multiple timelines. So when people ask me like when did this fascination, when do you start studying astrology? In this timeline, it would be age 8. My mom just bought a book home from a bookstore, not for me, just for her. And I found it so fascinating. You could categorize energies into 12 signs and they had these different types of traits. And when I read Scorpio, I'm like, whoo, like there's a lot that resonates. Let's go a little bit deeper. And that was at age 8. So when I was in elementary school, maybe like grade 2 or 3, I remember like going to like all my closest friends being like, what's your sign? What's your sign? Oh, you're an Aries. Oh, you're this. Oh, you're that. Like it just made so much sense. And then once I found out that there was more than just your sun sign, that there was your ascendant, your moon, all the other planets and aspects and timing techniques, like I was insatiable because it was just so fascinating to me that there was a system that could help you understand yourself. It was also, I'm also a big fan of the OG Charmed with Shannon Doherty, Holly Marie Combs, and Alyssa Milano. It's like when your powers grow and evolve. And for me, astrology in the form of a divination art and tool just felt like a natural evolution for my intuition to grow in this way, like it did with tarot, especially at that pivotal time when I was in Australia. And so with astrology, same thing. Like when I was with friends, with lovers, I'm like, what's your sign? What's your sign? What's this? What's that? I could often guess just based off their appearance and their overall energy. If they're like, no, that's not my sun sign, I'm like, okay, like what's your rising? What's your moon? Generally speaking, like even to this day, in my head, it does not shut off. Like I will always be like, oh, like they have this kind of appearance. They talk like this type of energy. Like I was just watching Madeline Petch, who was on Riverdale, like How I Made It. And she was like, yeah, I kept record of all my auditions. And there was like 200 and something. I'm like, she probably has some Virgo, like being that disciplined and detailing everything. And then I looked at her natal chart. She's a Leo sun, but her Mercury is in Virgo. And I love that she has like this beautiful red hair and she's a Leo sun. Like I always think about astrology. And for me, that just massively expanded over the pandemic. And I'll never forget when we started going into lockdown, my one friend, Justin, who now lives in New York City, he's a Pisces. And this is just a sidebar. Whenever I receive a little wink or a nudge from a Pisces sun specifically, like something that they say so off the cuff, or like there's no real like emphasis, but it's just something that they say in passing. It just honestly, for me, just feels like an angel like saying that. I'm like, there's something about Piscean energy where when they say something, it just like hits me right in the heart. And as I said, I'll never forget, he said, this will be a really good time for your business. People could really use some spiritual guidance right now. And to be honest, up until that point, I think Stillwater was just something for me to do as I was auditioning. I was auditioning for like Pixar, I was auditioning for Netflix. Like I gained such good momentum with my acting craft and confidence that reading tarot was just something I would do to not have to work in hospitality. And it was working. I was doing pop ups, I was doing markets, I was doing conferences, conventions, not conferences, but these huge events in Toronto, which gave me a lot of exposure, gave me a lot of confidence. Again, just reading for complete strangers, got some clients, but it wasn't expanding in the way that I honestly thought it would. I had crafted a new website. I'd rebranded from Stillwater Tarot to Stillwater Alchemy in 2020. And like no one booked in. I had all these DMs from people from like Barry's boot camp and all these other clients and friends of friends being like, I'll book in, I'll book in. Nothing. And I was not happy. I almost considered giving up. This would have been February, March. It was Mercury retrograde. Mercury was retrograde in Pisces, conjunct Neptune. This was all the confusion of what was going on that time. And I was very, very close because I was like losing followers for posting the tarot scopes monthly. I just felt like I wasn't getting traction. And it wasn't until we went to lockdown, I got that little nudge from my friend, whether he realized or not. I'm like, right, people are going to be glued to their phone. So let me give them something to look at because I know and I knew back then, and I still know now, that I have this immense talent and this gift, and that I'm worthy of being financially compensated. I am one of the best astrologers. Like, I firmly believe that. I've read for other astrologers, even early on in my practice, and people would say, I just love the way you speak. I love the way you weave in knowledge. I really trust your intuition. You're doing this from such a beautiful place. And I do. And this is kind of a sidebar as well, but I take what I do very seriously. I think it just comes from having so many placements in Capricorn and Scorpio. And it frustrates me when people don't put the same level of commitment into their gift or their calling and they give up too easily. And I get it when things are very, very challenging and when there are certain parts where it seems like it isn't working. And you can have that moment to pause. You can have that moment to be frustrated, but never give up. Like for me, it's just something that if you want it bad enough, it's going to come into your purview. Like that intensity, that passion is just so, for me, like whether it's the fact that I'm a Scorpio stellium or just why would you not want to feel that intensity and that passion and that purpose in everything that you do? So when I was creating all this content, I'm like, I know it's going to work. I know it's going to work. And then it was working. And then I would get one client and then they would reshare. And then I would get two more clients, or I'd get a client, then their mom and their sister would book in like an hour later. And it was at the point in 2020 where I was doing like 40 sessions a week. And that was just one offs. There'd be sometimes where I was doing like Zoom calls for business groups or like self-help groups that people were coaching. They're like, oh, I love, can you just do like mini readings for everyone? And I honestly love doing that. Like I love, and I'm sure other astrologers can speak to this that are listening, but when you have so many case studies in your head where it's like, okay, like this is an Aries with a Libra moon with a Virgo rising, or it's not a Virgo rising this time, now it's a Sag rising. Like you have, at least for me, like I can just see a chart so clearly in my mind's eye. I don't really need to see that. As long as I know they're ascendant, I can look and see where all these charts are, where the transits are, what was happening like 5 years ago, where certain placements are. And people are like, how do you just know that? Like, how can you see it? And for me, it's like, how can I not? I remember I had this, I had this one guy and I was saying something about his chart, and he's like, "Oh, that means a lot that you like took all this time to memorize my chart. You must really like me, huh?" And it's like, it's not that I don't like you. It's just that this comes really easily, and I don't want you to get the wrong impression. I'm just super obsessed with astrology. And all that's to say is that during the pandemic, when it was nonstop, I really just mastered my craft that much more. It would be like being on set as an actor with someone like Meryl Streep or Viola Davis or someone who's a goddess and getting to work with them nonstop every day for 4 years. By the end of that 4 years, you would have been a completely different actor, actress, performer, right? And I already had a lot of knowledge leading up to 2020. And then afterwards, I just got more and more confident. And I live and breathe this, like no matter what. And again, with anything, there can be moments where you're frustrated, being like, why isn't this working? Where the thought of giving up or the thought of just like letting it all burn to the ground is very real, especially in entrepreneurship, which is its own conversation. But astrology has been one constant for me, as with my intuition, as with anything in terms of spirituality and my faith to God, source, a higher power, that has always, 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 always pulled me through, even if my parents were lying, even if authority figures were being homophobic, even if there was confusion and chaos in other parts of my life. These divination arts truly have always been there and have always been right. And that's the thing, too. Even for me, if there's been times on my own personal journey where I feel like, not that I've miscalculated, but where I want things to happen faster. Again, I'm an Aries moon. I can always have that retrospective or retroactive look back and say, oh, this is why it happened. Oh, this is why I wasn't meant to go into dentistry, even though I wanted it so bad when I didn't get accepted. And I was so devastated that like when it wasn't working out in terms of dentistry, I'm like, why isn't this working? Like my grades are so good. Like my DAT score is good. I know I can interview well. Like, why am I not getting accepted? And I look back to that 19, 20, 21-year-old self and I'm like, woo, if you only knew how good it's going to get or how much purpose you're going to have with astrology. Like I said, like I could talk, and sometimes I do. I could talk about astrology all day long because I just have such a reverence and a passion, and I just see it all the time. Like I'll give one really quick story. As I mentioned last episode, I've been doing more research about Athena and this energy of Arachne and weaving, and I was looking for a candle holder to put on this altar that I have behind me if you're watching the video version. And I was like, okay, Athena, like guide me, like what's going on? And then I looked down and a spider is like crawling on the ground right beside me. I'm like, this is wild. Because of course, like with the tale of Athena and Arachne, that there's this notion of spiders being connected to Athena in some way, shape, or form. And it's funny too, because they had like this rivalry, and there was like, I couldn't even find a candle holder that day. And then I found a better one another day, but I did find a cute one for the Venus altar. All that's to say is I feel like with astrology and my obsession and my love and my devotion for this, that life just gets to be significantly more magical because I see certain things, and this might be with everyone when you're so in your devotion or your passion where you see things, it's like, how do other people not see this? Like it's so obvious or it's so loud or it's so evident. It's not that they necessarily need to sometimes. And Demetra George, who is such a goddess, an icon, a scholar of astrology, she often says that this knowledge of astrology, this art form of divination, isn't necessarily for everyone, that this power to hold and to share should not be taken lightly. And I completely agree with that statement. As we see on different social media sites when people are talking about astrology, and whether or not they're doing it from a sincere place is not always clear. And you can make a lot of coins from anything, including astrology and tarot and spiritual knowledge. But at least for me, it's been something that has truly saved my life, has truly made my life better. And I've worked with now thousands of people one on one, probably hundreds of thousands if we're talking about my content reaching people in terms of videos and content that I've created over the years. And I've received a lot of beautiful words and a lot of messaging. And for me, that's what it's all about, is being able to use your gifts and your tools to make other people's lives better. And I really do think we're coming full circle with me mentioning all my Scorpio energy at the start of this. Scorpio energy having that notion of the phoenix rising, death and rebirth, even the connection to alchemy of turning darkness into light, lead into gold. I do think there's a reason why Scorpio, especially Scorpio rising, individuals love black, like black and gold, like that black and gold aesthetic is always so attractive to people. And I feel like that's very, very, very Scorpionic in terms of like being able to turn the darkest, painful, most traumatic parts of their life into gold, into riches, into light for people to enjoy. I know for me, that's been very loud and very present in my life. And I'm excited to see how this all grows and evolves. But I know no matter what, even just those day to day, like Athena and Arachne, it's like that just makes me smile. And I'm even looking at the clock, it's 1, 2, 3, 4. There's just certain things where I feel it just gives you that greater connection to the divine, to source, to like that most miraculous love and power that makes us all feel all the feelings, like that full body tingle sensation when you know you're in alignment, when you know you're in the right place at the right time. Like everything that I do with regards to my spirituality, with my gifts, with my devotion has that energy every single day. So that is a bigger taste, if you will, of who I am and how I got started in all of this. It is kind of wild to think, though, even just recapping it now, how certain events in my life have formed other attributes. And yeah, if there's anything I can impart upon this, is that one, if we're talking about witches, queer people, women, minorities, for a lot of us, it has not felt safe to express this knowledge, to express these gifts because of fear of being called horrific names, being attacked, being bullied, being outcasted, being called weird, this or that, whatever the story has been. I know for me, especially going on dates and trying to connect more intimately with people, there was a lot of that judgment at first. And people saying, oh, you're really into that. Like I had to have like sneaky ways of me asking romantic prospects what their zodiac sign is. Easy in terms of like, how old are you? Oh, did you just turn 34? Are you turning 34 this year? Oh, what's your exact birthday? And they're like, I'm a Libra. I'm like, okay, good to know. But it's something where if you're someone who has these spiritual gifts, but you don't necessarily feel safe or you've had past pain, hurt, rejection, abandonment by sharing these gifts, this can also be something that you have done in past lives, which again is kind of another conversation in and of itself. But I want to share that because I know for me that was very real. And a big part of that change was during Venus's last retrograde in Leo in the summer, or like June, July, August of 2023, when I was just being very upfront when I was going on dates and people, if they had a negative or disrespectful tone about astrology, it was just an instant no. I was like, I'm not going to place myself where I'm going to be not valued and respected. And I had a lot of experience studying that in a professional sphere with astrology specifically. But it wasn't until I had that in my personal life and I changed my belief around that, that I started then attracting romantic interests that found it super cool and fascinating that I am a professional astrologer, that I have this devotion. So that's also something I want to impart, that if you've had a negative experience with having these spiritual gifts, whether it be from close family or friends, that program, that narrative is still running in your subconscious, right? That it doesn't feel safe for you to let people in because you have been hurt, betrayed, abandoned, maybe not just in this past life, but in multiple timelines. And that's what your soul is wanting to learn, being like, it is safe for me to be seen. It is safe for me to share this knowledge. It is safe for me to be of service with my gifts. And at least for me, this online platform, which is very, very like my natal Saturn is in Aquarius, all this took off during my Saturn return. With Pluto now in Aquarius, it's even louder. I'm feeling that this aspect of community, no matter how you find it, whether it is just a podcast, quote unquote, just whether you're going to meetups in person, whether you are traveling, being seen and having that similar connection with your mindset, with your beliefs. Because let me say this, and sometimes I really do feel like I'm the Chamber of Secrets with all of the Scorpio energy that I possess, because I've seen some wild, wild, crazy things with me not even having to look for it. Like it finds me, or people just spill this hot tea like in my DMs, like, hey, you know this person? Do 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 do. I'm like, I was just literally sipping coffee in my Sailor Moon mug, and these wild messages are coming in. Why I say that though is even in any industry, including the spirituality community, there are people that might say or do the right things, and intuitively you're like, this does not necessarily resonate, or I don't understand why they're doing this and that. And I've again gotten DMs from some of these like huge influential people in the industry being like, what's your thought on this, or what's your opinion on this? And again, it's not for me. Even I will tell everyone that I work with and on my platforms, being like, even the things that I say, you have to discern if it's relevant for you at this time. Even this podcast, like this is something that I'm doing with the intent of being of service. I was texting my one friend right before I filmed this, and I was like, there's very little ego attached to me in this podcast. Yes, I want the quality to be good. Yes, I want to show up at my best. But me expecting a certain outcome to achieve more fame or more money or more status is not the goal. Like I have so much sixth house activation with all these Gemini transits going on as I'm filming this in June of 2024, where the ego is being removed. I'm like, this is for me to be of service. If every human was of service, how amazing would that be? Why I went on this side tangent is because when you find the right people, when you find the right people in business, in love, in any element of your life, it's so obvious it clicks. Like I mentioned before, when I hear those little winks and nudges and off the cuff saying from like a Pisces dominant individual, it just sits with me. And there's something that it just activates. And for you, that could be coming from a Gemini, a Sag, a Libra, an Aries. It does not matter. When you have that deep inner knowing, it's like your soul's compass leading you in the right direction. And the only time you're going to face significant delays or frustrations is when, one, the ego hijacks that, or two, you've let other people in your past dictate what is right, quote unquote, and what is wrong, quote unquote. And I guess that's a good place for me to wrap this up in terms of everything that I've learned. There's always been this inner knowing, and it's not always about being right. It's about knowing what feels right in your body, that emotional connection, at least for me, being a Scorpio, Scorpio being a water sign, I have to feel good. I have to feel safe in my body. And if I don't, then it's okay for me to walk this path alone, to not reject help and support, but to ensure that I'm feeling safe and that I'm able to use my voice, to use my platform, to use my knowledge, and to use my gifts to help other people, and to know that when I'm doing that from a heart-centered, service-oriented mindset, that it always is well received, that people want to love and support me. And if I need time because of other factors in my life to rest, to recalibrate, that's okay. Because me showing back up to hone in my craft, to sharpen these spiritual skills, to connect with community, that's always going to be there. Because that is, again, what I believe our soul's purpose to be, is to help one another, to reflect that light to one another so that we can all grow and heal on whatever lessons that our soul want to learn in this timeline. All right. So I think that's all for this episode. Let me know what you think in the comment section if you're watching this on Stillwater Alchemy's YouTube channel, or feel free to leave me a DM on Stillwater Alchemy's Instagram, or you can send an email to stillwateralchemy@gmail.com with any notes, comments. Respectful. Sometimes people get mad when I don't respond, and I'm like, this is such a rude, unsolicited comment. I'm very big on respect and fairness and kindness. That's my Venus and Libra being very, very loud. And again, 99.9% of the time, that is very that. And of course, I appreciate you all tuning in for today. And I trust that this goes a little bit deeper into who Matthew Oliver is and the man behind the curtain. so to speak. So have a beautiful rest of your day and stay blessed. Bye for now. On this episode, I'm going to be revealing a bit more about myself, peek behind the curtain as to how I got started in all of this, my background, my talents, my gifts, that, blah, 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 blah. Okay, two, take two, baby.